Our next guest has quite a resume. Born in Havana, Cuba, he was the 75th governor of the state of New Hampshire, chair of the state's Republican Party. In between, he served as chief of staff to President George H.W. Bush. And he's the subject of his new book, The Quiet Man, taken from Bush 41's speech at the 1988 convention. I am a quiet man, but I hear the quiet voices others do not. John Sununu joins me now. Governor, it's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So what is the most important thing we learned about Bush 41 that we didn't know before?
That he passed more domestic legislation than any other president except Lyndon Johnson and Franklin Roosevelt.
Well, so you put him really high up in the pantheon on that. Give us 2 or 3 examples of things you think were critical in that front.
You know, even the budget agreement they didn't like produced all the surpluses and the growth we saw in the 90s, the Clean Air Bill, Civil Rights Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, energy deregulation, farm reform, a whole pantheon, a whole collection of legislation.
And the reason we don't know that as well is because he is in many ways seen as a foreign policy president. And so most people I know say he did what the Middle East right. He had a plan. He formed a coalition. He knew when to get out. Why were the lessons of that lost on his son?
I think the circumstances and environment and the climate was different. George W. Bush, his son, had to deal with the country post 9/11, and our mood as a country was very different then.
So let me give you a few names and give me a sentence on them. People you refer to in the book. Newt Gingrich. Look at the look on his face. Go ahead.
Tucked it to George Bush.
And what does that mean? I'll give you one more sentence.
He agreed to the budget agreement and then decided that it was in his political interest to go out and fight it.
Okay, and then there was this guy who went on to become vice president, or more in some people's minds, who was Secretary of Defense while you were there, Dick Cheney. Sentence.
Did a good job as Secretary of Defense for 41.
Well, what are you talking about? Didn't you write that the plan that he put together was one that your boss was not crazy about? So what do you mean did a good job?
Dick delivered the general's plan, and the president and Scowcroft and I kind of looked at each other. It was to go up the middle in order to get Saddam. Scowcroft rightly suggested that perhaps a movement around the flank would have less casualties, and he was right.
So what? You're not a politically correct guy. So why did you say he did a good?
Because he delivered the plan for the generals, but when the president directed him to go back and fix it, he did go back and fix it quickly.
Okay, and how about Roger Ailes? Most of us only know of him as the president of Fox News. Look at you laughing now. Roger Ailes, media consultant to the stars.
Roger's a dear friend.
And
Roger understands the media better than anyone I've ever seen. I often tease Bush that when they took the picture of him getting on the submarine when he was 18 years old after having been shot down, I always teased him, asking him how he had Roger Ailes show up that early.
Speaking of Roger Ailes, though, Roger Ailes and Peggy Noonan, a brilliant writer who was obviously a speechwriter at that time, wrote that convention speech that I mentioned a minute ago, which included the famous, if not infamous line, "Read my lips, no new taxes," from which the president, I think, courageously ultimately decided to withdraw. Blame, you didn't like the word blame when I mentioned to you on Boston Public Radio today, but you blame Ailes and Noonan for having inserted that in the speech to begin with, right?
No, I point out that they put it in there. I think from their perspective, it was they did the right thing. I think that the folks that were in the political piece of the campaign at that time should have recognized that every president, every governor has to accept legislation with some inflationary increase in taxes and fees, and they put too much of an absolute on it.
Okay, speaking of George H.W., let's talk about his better half in the minds of many. Here is Barbara Bush and something she had to say a few months ago.
It's a great country. There are a lot of great families, and it's not just 4 families or whatever. There are other people out there that are very qualified, and we've had enough Bushes.
We've had enough. That was 2013. I was wrong. Now, you've taken that to heart. You were a big supporter, obviously, of H.W. as a candidate, big supporter of W, not a supporter of Jeb Bush. What's that about?
I have too many friends running in this campaign. I'm really probably not going to endorse anybody. I'm out making sure that the world sees that what a great president George Herbert Walker Bush was, and I'm spending my time focusing on the quiet man. You
know, speaking of Republicans running for president, were you not horrified by that? We mentioned this earlier in the show, by the fact that some of the candidates running on the Republican side could not even summon the courage to say, take down that flag. Did that not bother you, Governor?
I think it's a question of timing. I think you're going to, after the funerals are over, I think you're going to hear them all come to a common consensus that the flag should come down.
Is Hillary Clinton going to be the nominee of the Democratic Party?
I think there's a 70% chance she will, but not much more than 70%.
Bernie Sanders beats her?
I think Bernie Sanders weakens her, and somebody else maybe gets dragged into the race, Biden or John Kerry.
There's a pretty famous guy in New Hampshire who once said, Iowa picks corn, New Hampshire picks presidents. You know who that is?
A great man.
Okay, fine, a great man. That's somebody who looks very much like you. First of all, the history is they don't pick that many non-incumbent presidents, and you know
they
that.
have no. They have
Since Reagan. When have they done it on the Republican side? Since JFK.
George Herbert Walker Bush. Since Reagan.
No, George. Okay. So on the Republican side, since JFK and Jimmy Carter, nobody, right? On the Democratic side, non-incumbent.
No, they actually picked Clinton.
By the way, George H.
They actually picked Clinton because the only guy that beat Clinton was Tsongas as a favorite.
Okay, well that's called coming in second. That's not winning.
Sure, it was.
So
everybody gave it to Tsongas. It's the guy who comes in second and gets the message.
Explain to me in a minute or 30 seconds of a minute. Why should a state that is so small, that is not ethnically diverse, that's major city is like 350th in size, why should it have as much power as it has in the picking of the leader of the free world?
Because God intended it that way.
How is the former president, by the way, who's one of the few people, I have to say, people of all parties seem to think incredibly well. How is
He's doing well. We had lunch with him about 3.5 weeks ago. He looked great. He sounded great. I think he ate a little too much at lunch, but his appetite was good, which is really a good thing to see. He actually looked better than he did a year ago.
You've never had that lunch problem that he had, have you?
I have the problem at all 3 meals.
Governor, it's a pleasure.